Happy Friday to you guys. This is Brent with Lykins Motorsports. We are working on a 445 cubic inch Ford FE. Wanted to show you guys something before we get started. I just got the crank back yesterday from having it balanced. Last week when I was filing the rings, I noticed something that it didn't set well with me. This is the oil rails. If you notice, it doesn't have any tension. And it was incredibly hard for me to even check the end gap on the oil rail, and it fell through. It's almost impossible to pick an oil rail up off the floor without a magnet, so I'll just leave it there for a second. But it was impossible for me to check the end gap. I'm gonna show you another one. I mean, if I let go of it, it just has zero tension at all. And these thin rings don't have a lot of tension, but I've done enough of these to know that didn't seem right. So I ordered a single set just to check, and they came in yesterday, and here's the results of that. And I can set that in there. I can use my squaring tool, and it stays in the bore. So I have put out an email to my contact at Male, and I'm going to get another full set of oil rails for this piston. I just don't feel comfortable with what those others were doing. They literally would not stay in the bores at all, and you couldn't even look at them without them falling through. I just don't have any desire to play roulette with that. So that'll set us back several days until I get a full set of oil rails from them. But for today, we can get quite a bit done. The crank is back, so I'm going to recheck the main bearing clearances. We'll get the crank in the block. We'll get, I do have one set of oil rails, so we can get one piston in there, and that's enough to degree the cam, check piston valve clearance, order measure for push rods and that sort of thing. So let's get started on that. All right, so I did measure all the main bearing clearances again, and we did end up polishing 2 or 3 tenths off of the main journals of that crank. Just for informational purposes, we ended up around 2.83 thousandths on the main bearing clearance and around 2.5 on the rod bearing clearance. I'm going to get the crank washed one more time. We're going to put our rear main seals in, and then we'll get that crank dropped in. All right, we got our rear main seal in. Lip always goes towards the front, and we're going to lube it up real good with some assembly lube. You never want a dry seal. We're also going to put some assembly lube on our bearings. All right, crank is in the block. One thing you need to check on scat cranks, see that little gap there between this is your slinger for the back and the block. Roll that crank over. In years past, there have been a couple of cranks that have had this ground off center, and it rubs the block, so just check yours. Before the caps go on, we're going to check our thrust bearing clearance with just this upper half in. I always do that before I do anything else, because if you don't have clearance here, then crank needs to come out, and that bearing shell needs to come out and get sanded. Got about 8 thousandths on in play with just the upper bearing in, so that is well within spec, and it's on these bracket race cars with manual transmission. I like having a little bit of extra clearance there. But we are in the clear for putting our caps on. Here's our rear main cap. Here's our rear main seal. It's been lubed up. Seal facing the front. We'll get that bearing lubed up, and we'll put just a little bit of silicone, wipe a little bit on the outside of the cap and also on the ends of the rear main seals, and we'll start putting these on. We're going to continue with putting our main studs in. It's best, if you're running studs, it's best to put these in after the crank is in, otherwise you've got another 10 obstacles or 8 obstacles to dodge around. We're expecting some bad weather today, so I've kind of got my ears peeled to the news and to the sirens outside. High winds, lots of rain, possible tornado activity, so I can hear it raining right now. Studs just need to go in hand tight. Here is our number 1 main cap. Gonna put some lube on it. Number 2. So it's best when you take your block to be machined to just take note of which way everything was stamped. Generally, the triangle points towards the front on the block. This one has all the triangles face towards the front of the block, but the numbers are stamped, you know, different ways. So just take note of that. On this block, it's I think it's impossible to put the caps on backwards because they are staggered on size. So if I were to try to put this cap on backwards, you can see that it interferes right here. So otherwise it goes on good. We're gonna skip the 3rd main cap for right now. We're gonna go to the 4th one. Okay, we're going to get some ARP lube on our studs and on the bottoms of our nuts. Do not put ARP lube on the washers. That's a no-no. Put them on the bottoms of the nuts and we'll get these snug down. Okay, so I've got the thrust cap on and don't have any lubricant on it, assembly lube, because it's too sticky, and usually when you have to take this stuff apart you don't want sticky stuff. So got motor oil on it. These caps are halfway, well, there's no torque on them, I've just snugged them down really good. On a block that's doweled on the caps, you can't set the thrust bearing, it pretty much is what it is. But on this block, no doweled caps, just studs, so we have to set the thrust bearing. You do that by smacking it to the back with a dead blow hammer and then smacking it towards the rear. And then I usually take a flat screwdriver and drive it in between, or don't drive it, just set it down in between the cap and the counterweight to hold forward pressure on the crankshaft while I torque the main caps, and then we can check the crank in play. So you gotta set that. And then we're gonna put our screwdriver in there. and then we'll get to torquing and check our crank in play. Okay, we hit about 8 thousandths with just the upper bearing in. Now we've got about 5. So that's why I don't put assembly lube on the cap side of the bearing. When you pull it off, it's just a big mess that you got to clean up, sticky stuff. So we'll pull this cap off, clean it up, and then we're going to sand the front side of the thrust bearing and get us another 2 or 3 thousandths. Then we'll check it again. Okay, so we got had to do that twice. Got our crank thrust clearances set. We can now go ahead and put in our silicone for our side gaskets. I don't use the rubber pieces and the nails. I just shoot these cavities full of silicone until it starts to seep out the front and the back. And that has served me very well over the last decade or so. So keeps me from having to shape all these rubber pieces. They vary from block to block. It's just a pain. So silicone in here, and we'll get to the timing set next. Okay, we're going to be using our Coy's billet timing set, and the cam. So you get 2 dowel choices for the cam stuff. A short dowel that's used for no fuel pump eccentric, or a 2-piece fuel pump eccentric, or the long dowel that goes with the 1-piece fuel pump eccentric. The 2-piece has a tab that sticks down in there and keeps the eccentric from turning. So that's why you need a short dowel. The 1-piece eccentric uses the dowel to locate it. So the dowel is long enough that it sticks out past the timing gear face and engages the fuel pump eccentric. This engine is going in a car with an electric fuel pump. So we'll use a fuel pump block-off plate, no eccentric. And what I'll probably do is put just a little tiny ball bearing underneath the cam bolt washer. In the event that the cam dowel comes out, it won't disengage the cam, but we'll just keep that in there just to hold pressure against it. Always use a hardened washer, and check the depth from the underside of your washer to the end of your threads, and compare it to whatever you're tightening up against, whether it be either your timing set or your eccentric. Make sure you have adequate thread length engagement. All right, so we got our cam bolt in. I am banking on this cam coming in where it needs to be on the valve vents. Got our ball bearing captured underneath the washer. That's torqued. Next thing, cam thrust in play was checked, and so let me say a little bit about cam in play. I have ran I think all the way up to like 9 thousandths, and I've never had any issues. I think the tightest I've ran is 4. So if you're looking for numbers on what to run, I will tell you that anything between 4 and 8 or 9 thousandths will be perfectly fine. I usually try to match it up though to the thrust bearing clearance. In the event that your cam is walking or your crank is walking, you don't want one pulling on the timing chain and you know, trying to affect the other one. So I try to match the two up. Again, this I think the cam thrust in plate come in at 7 thousandths. Our crank is around 8 or so, so we're in good shape there. And I want to get one piston and rod assembly knocked in, and then we can begin our cam degree and our piston to valve clearance checks and see how far we are above or below deck. Okay, we got our camshaft agreed. We're using some BAM solid roller lifters on this one. Everything was pretty much straightforward. Always find top dead center, true top dead center first. cam has, let's see, 3 degrees of advance in it. So it came in on a 106.5 degree intake center line. And that allows me to check dynamic compression ratio and make sure that we're in the money for running on pump gas, which this motor needs to do. And we have about 61 degrees of overlap, which in the past has netted me 13, 14 inches of vacuum. So should be in good shape there. Bigger the degree wheel, the better. When you get to things like this, a 1/2 degree can make a big difference, although you're kind of limited on what you can adjust with your timing set. This one allows you to make 2 degree increments. So, but always degree your cam. And it's not a factor of, if the cam was ground incorrectly, it could be this gear is off a little bit, this gear is off a little bit, your crankshaft isn't indexed correctly. So always take time to degree. And I've seen some big faux pas before that needed to be corrected. We are degreed. I can take all this apart, and we're going to check piston and valve clearance next. Okay, so we're in the midst of checking our piston valve clearance. I took the time to check how much lift we were getting at the valve. It's usually a double check that I do, plus I'm checking geometry to make sure that we're getting what we get, or what we should get. We're getting a nice little thin pattern near the center of the valve stem, which is good. The issue is that we're getting a lot more lift than what we should be getting. And that is kind of typical with aluminum bodied rocker arms, because they design these with deflection in mind. What usually happens is when you use a checking spring, you get a lot more lift. But this isn't a checking spring, so this is like the inner spring of the valve springs that we're using. I was getting, so I should have on the exhaust valve, I should have, I think, 710 at the valve. With the checking spring, I was getting 790, and I was like, holy moly. Here, we're getting 725. So what I've done, there's like a catch-22 here. So if you use a checking spring, you get abnormal results. If you use the actual valve spring, then you can't use a push rod length checker, because these will bend and the threads will strip and all that kind of stuff. So I want to see what we get at the valve, or I just want to write off the fact that it's not a rocker arm issue or something like that. So what I've done is I've ordered a single push rod, a real push rod, and that will let me see what's going on at the valve and measure what we're getting versus what we should be getting. So that won't hurt our piston to valve clearance checks at all, because if anything, we're going to be getting more lift where the piston sees it. And if the piston to valve clearance is good, then it's going to be better with less lift at the valve. And we have more than adequate piston to valve clearance. And I've covered this in videos before. It's not really the lift that gives you the issue. It's the amount of overlap that the cam has. So overlap causes the valves to hang open. And if your piston is in the right spot when a valve is open, then you can get tighter piston to valve clearances. But we've got like 250 depth and almost 300 on the intake side. So we have a mile of clearance, and even with 690 and 700 lift, and actually we've been getting a little bit more lift than what we should have. So we're in good shape there. I'm gonna pull the clay off. I want to get my head bolted back on because when the push rod comes in, I want to be able to go ahead and check that out. I put the actual springs back on the head, and I should have that push rod tomorrow, and then I can check and see what we're getting at the valve. I think before I put that head on though, I think I'm gonna get the timing cover on. Everything's buttoned up under here, so we have torqued this 65 pound-feet for a billet steel cam, 45 for a flat tappet cam. Our thrust plate bolts are torqued. We got lubricant behind our timing chain. Cam is degreed. I've checked the alignment of gears with a straight edge. So we are ready to rock and roll there. I won't bore you with the process. You can look back through previous videos and see how this goes. A little bit of silicone on the gasket, a little bit of silicone on top of the gasket, and then use a centering tool to center the timing cover up on the crankshaft. We got our balancer spacer on. This is a Power Bond race balancer, is SFI approved with an ARP crank bolt. Stainless fasteners from alloybolts.com with a lock washer and a flat washer. I thoroughly enjoyed watching you guys lose your religion last week when I put a lock washer on something. Good entertainment. So we're gonna set, this is one of the adjustable timing pointers, billet aluminum, that I have made for me and offer. You just easily bring everything up to top dead center, and then point your pointer at 0 and screw your pointer down. Okay, so we are back to where we can check our lift at the valve as soon as the push rod arrives. But making some progress. A few bumps in the road, but no hill for a traveler, right? Waiting on oil rails from Mahle, waiting on a single push rod so that we can check some other things we got going on. But well on our way to a finished engine. Looking very good. Says do not remove, but I promise you it'll come off there. I don't like those decals at all. I think they make the engine look kind of junky, but it'll come off there. All right, guys. Hope you guys are doing okay and you're having a good week. Stay tuned next week for a couple more videos. Should have some updates on this engine, parts coming in, and we'll be able to knock some stuff out. Not too much further to go. All the parts came in except for the push rods, which we'll have to measure for exactly the right length that we need and order those from either Trend or Smith Brothers. And we'll be able to see what diameter we can fit in our intake manifold, which is very important. But our valve covers are here. Customer wanted some chrome powered by Ford valve covers. We've got a Mylodon oil pan and an MSD distributor, so we are well on our way. If you are watching my channel for the first time, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out. We do a tremendous amount of Ford engines here, a lot of FEs predominantly, and FEs of all types. So all the way up from 352 to up over 510 cubic inches. All right, guys, hope you're having a good weekend, and I will catch you next week.